Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be painting on my new easel. I made this for plein air painting as well as in the studio, but primarily for plein air painting. This is based on the James Coulter easel. You can purchase an already made setup from Artbox Panel. I decided to simply look at their design and make something rather similar. As you can see, the main part of this setup is a panel holder connected to the tripod, and then the box that sits on the wings of the tripod. And there I'm just showing you how I constructed that a little bit. There are other videos that you may want to check out that show exactly how to build this. There's also a brush holder that I created just with a little screw on the side there, and using some PVC tubing that you can get at your local lumber store. I'm using an 11 by 14 panel again, canvas panel, titanium white, cad yellow light, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and burnt umber. These are all Gamblin colors. For my mineral spirits, that's Gamsol. And then I'm using hog bristle brushes. There's an 8, 6, 4, then 2 rounds, 4 and a 6, and then a liner number 2 from that's an Princeton Aspen brush, and then a fan brush. All of these are made by Princeton, different series though. For the medium, I'm going to be using some non-solvent medium, which is made by Gamblin, and I may use it, may not. Then this is an eraser, and I use the point on this to sign my name. On the other side, I'm showing you just the side panels and the mixing area, which are very helpful. It basically produces a table. These are chip brushes. There's a 2-inch and a 1-inch. I end up not using that in this video, but these are wonderful tools to have. Once some of the loose hairs fall out, they're great for coming up with grasses and so forth in a painting. They're also good for if you do an underpainting, to use the chip brushes for that as well. It produces an uneven stroke, and oftentimes in landscape painting, that's what you're looking for, is to try to replicate the natural scene, which is going to be rather chaotic. It's not a pattern, and so chip brushes can be very useful for getting some different strokes in. This is once again 11 by 14 canvas panel, and then you see the reference photo that we're going to be working on today. Today's theme of this video is going to be painting loose. How do we loosen up, and how do we practice doing that? And this painting demo is going to really take this photo that I took in an area here in Missouri, one of the creek beds. This is near Femio Sage, Missouri, if you're familiar with that area, in what we call wine country here in Missouri, near Augusta and Washington, Missouri. A little place called Femio Sage. Here I'm taking, I think it's the number 6 hog bristle brush, making a mixture of my dark. Of course, now I use a limited palette, so that means for my dark I usually use burnt umber and ultramarine blue, or alizarin crimson and ultramarine blue is the mixture. Here today I'm using burnt umber and the ultramarine blue, and sketching in on the canvas. One thing I probably should have done, I usually tone a canvas first and let it dry completely before painting on it. So this is a white canvas today, and essentially the drawing is going to be the underpainting. But I didn't really enjoy the experience of painting on a solid white canvas, to tell you the truth. So keep that in mind that you'll develop your own preferences, and you may not have any problem at all just doing it without an underpainting. But I tend to take a red or some kind of a orangish mixture to paint an underpainting first and let that dry entirely, and then I will come in and do a painting on top of it. And primarily because I'm a landscape painter and there's so many greens, that having some kind of a red or an orange background can really help produce a sort of vibration in the paint colors that are used. Here you can see that this is obviously that burnt umber is coming out stronger perhaps than the ultramarine blue in this mixture. And I am loosening up by extending my arm and allowing myself some freedom just to make some strokes, and also to erase some things. That's also a part of loose painting, as far as I'm concerned, is the ability to not feel committed to every single stroke that you're putting down on the surface. Here, I'm just kind of getting the flow and trying to replicate how I felt when I scouted out this particular scene. As you can tell, there's not a lot going on in the scene. We have a stream, we've got trees, we've got some distant hills and a blue sky. It's not the most attractive scenery for a painting, but you will often find when you're plein air painting that every scene has its complications, has its assets, and you as the artist have to pull those things out and know when to replicate exactly what you see, or go for some different effect. I oftentimes want to give an expression of how I felt about the place rather than necessarily attempting to do any realism. This is not going to be a realistic painting, by the way, so this is impressionistic. This might be a good time just to remind you that I would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel. That way you'll be notified as soon as new painting demonstrations or other videos are posted on my channel. If you like the content, by all means give me a thumbs up as well. And if you got any comments or questions or ideas for future videos, feel free to make your comments down below. Still producing this mixture and working on this sense of the creek. I always start with my darks and then move to my lights. It's just easier to paint that way. And when you're doing your sketching, you should think about that too, that you want to start with the darks. This is just, like I said, burnt umber, a little bit of ultramarine blue, and then some Gamsol mineral spirits is the medium right now in this first layer of paint. And notice that I'm keeping it very, very thin, the paint. And I'm holding the brush at the end of the brush and attempting to get some strokes in there that are not that careful. I'm looking for accidents on purpose. I'm trying to stay loose. There's a bit of a line, as you can tell, in the distant hills, and a little bit of a darker shade in the background there. And so I'm trying to replicate that a little bit here. That will become a little bit softer as the painting progresses. But for right now, I wanted to note that horizon line and get the brush putting some paint on the canvas. I'm also, as I'm painting today, thinking about if I was doing this outdoors, that the light is changing so quickly that you really do need to practice, even in the studio, putting down the paint as quickly as possible and attempting to get your initial shapes and lay-in done. Once again, Now I'm going back in with a little bit more of the dark colors. And I'm seeing a lot of shadows and shapes there on this little creek. And attempting to replicate that flow with my brushstrokes. You also notice that I'm not using very many brushes in this particular demo. I think I held on to this number 6 hog bristle brush. This is the Ashley line from Princeton for the majority of the painting, especially the first pass of colors, as as I'm thinking about getting some color all over the canvas all at once, and then I can always go back in and reshape the forms and apply different colors, etc. Here, still reacting to the landscape. And like I may have said in some other videos, I do prefer to scout my own places, use my own reference photos, and spend some time really sketching the scene, thinking about my feelings, and making some notes of how I experienced that scene, so that when I do come into the studio and paint like this, I am also utilizing my personal experience of being on site at that scene as I'm thinking about how to paint it. And I would encourage any painter to do the same. A careful study sometimes simply involves sitting there, taking some notes of the scene, taking some photos, writing down some of your experiences and feelings about the scene. Especially if you are a hobbyist and you don't necessarily have the time to do a field study painting of this place, or even a sketch of the scene. You can still pick up a lot by simply noting a few of your reactions, taking a few photos, just spending some time in the landscape, as opposed to just thinking about painting or drawing or sketching a scene. Now, you'll notice that I'm putting in trees now with this dark mixture of, once again, burnt umber and ultramarine blue. But I'm doing it in a relatively loose way. I'm not trying to depict the trees just as I see them in this photo reference or anything of that nature. And I'm just varying some of this by the amount of pressure that I'm putting down on the painting brush and the amount of paint that I have on the brush. And you'll notice that if you squint, the scene is just shapes and colors. And so I'm trying to do the best I can at looking at those shapes and colors and getting some of that feeling into the painting early on. Some of this is going to get covered up by the other layers of paint that I will be putting down, but this gives me sort of a map of where it's going to go, and some of these little bits of color are going to remain in the painting, which is good because in many respects, since I'm using a white canvas today, I'm conscious of the fact that I want to make sure that I cover all the little white pixels, so that in the finished product I really don't want any of this canvas showing. Once again, I can't paint all of those individual trees, so I'm giving the illusion of detail by simply dragging some of that brownish mixture across different areas of the painting there. And eventually it'll give you a sense or a feeling that there's a lot of trees back there. And then pulling out just a couple of trees in prime locations to become focal points along the way and to help the eye interpret all the other little marks that are less distinguishable as trees bushes, etc., in this particular landscape. One reason I put this branch in from that right side is that just like the other three trees that I just previously put in there, it stops the eyes from bouncing off of the canvas. It keeps you inside the composition. I would describe the composition as an S composition, using the creek to bring your eye into focus into this painting from the left to the right, and then as you can see that turn of the creek, taking it back further, producing the signature S in the composition. Here I'm just noting some other darker tones at various places. If this is one of the first videos you've watched, you will know that I'm fond of telling you that you need to have a kind of ugly painting to begin with and not to worry about it. Part of painting loose is realizing that it's okay. This is oil paint we are using, and it actually contributes to the whole to have paint upon paint upon paint. And so having some mistakes is okay. You're not trying to go for detail at this point. All you're trying to do is map out some of the big shapes that you see in the landscape, and that's what I'm still working on at this junction in the painting process, is getting enough notes of what I'm looking at and observing that I'll be able to pull out some contrast then. And that's what painting's all about, is really contrast, color against color, drawing against drawing. You can't tell one without the other. Here I'm introducing a mixture that is green, just to give a few hints. In the photo reference and in real life, there was some hints of green grass still at this point of the year. And so that's made from a mixture of ultramarine blue and cadmium yellow light. Obviously, since this is a limited palette, I've only got one yellow to choose from, one blue to choose from. And so I had to be careful about the intensity of the value that I'm mixing, because I will invariably go back in and want to have different shades perhaps of that green. So keep that in mind when you're creating your greens. You have to know how saturated you can make that green and how much titanium white it takes to take it down in its tonal value. Here, cleaning off those darks, I'm thinking about the distant hill line and what color I'm going to try to shoot for at first. Just showing you the different colors that I'm mixing as a reminder to me in this voiceover to mention what colors I'm mixing on the palette to create the various shades and tones. Since with this easel you can't necessarily see me mixing the colors directly on the palette, at some point I may be able to figure out how to do that with a different or a multiple camera setup, but for now we're not going to worry about that. So this is a mixture of burnt umber, cad yellow light, and a touch of titanium white to produce this kind of reddish brown, or what I would say is basically burnt sienna. And it's one of the reasons I use a limited palette, because I don't really need to buy a tube of burnt sienna when I just mixed it. I've mixed a brown that's very close to it with that formula. And over time, especially if you're a new artist, keep it simple and you will get the benefit of having your colors go together, creating visual harmony, and learning very quickly how to mix almost every color that you really need. You can make with the colors that I showed you at the very beginning of this video. You do not need to carry around 20 different tubes of paint in order to capture a scene. And of course, if you're doing much plein air painting, you certainly don't want the added weight of all these large tubes. And I still would advise that you would buy large tubes of paint instead of the smaller versions, the 37 or 40 milliliter tubes. It's just such a price difference between the price you're paying per uh, you know per the amount of paint, the milliliters that you're receiving. So keep that in mind. Save yourself some money and buy the professional grade paints, and then buy the large tubes is my suggestion. These colors are all by Gamblin today, by the way. They are traditional oils. I have done some experimenting with some water mixable oils, so in the past you may have seen me paint with those. I have finally come to the conclusion that there's just something about regular oil paint that I enjoy, and I'm not ready to make the switch to water mixable oils as my only paint. And so, in fact, I've made a determination to simply go back to Gamblin and to traditional oils. I just did not see there being that big of a reason for changing to water mixable oils in my case. I already do not use mediums that are really solvent based. I don't have any reactions to using Gamsol in the studio or obviously outdoors. And so I don't, and oftentimes what my experience with the water mixable oils was, my brushes really paid a penalty for it. Uh, the brushes don't last as long. They don't stand up to the wear and tear of water mixable oils. And it's just a little bit different painting process when you're painting with them. And so those are some of my conclusions about using water mixable oils. For many of you, you'll have no problem whatsoever, and would encourage you to at least give it a try. But for me, it just didn't work. Notice that I'm just varying the color just a little bit. This is a mixture of burnt umber and titanium white, and I'm just looking at the tonal values now. And then comparing it to the photo reference. Now you'll notice, and you may be saying, well, David, the colors just are not the same. You're not painting what you're looking at. That's true. I'm not trying to paint a realistic scene of this photo reference. I'm actually trying to loosen up and experiment with the colors and trying to interpret the colors of the scene in a different visual way that may be more exciting than what I actually saw in the photo reference. Because after all, the goal of the painting process is not to create something that looks just like the photo. I hope that the reason I'm painting is to produce a work of art, to show others my interpretation of this particular scene that I experienced. At this point, you'll notice we're about 25 minutes in, and I've got most of the canvas already covered with the first coat of paint. And that might be a good analogy if you're starting out. That one of the number one goals is to get that first layer of paint on. And just like if you were painting a room in your house or the house itself, it's going to, in most cases, it's going to take more than just one coat. You're at least going to have to go back in and deal with the trim or tape around other areas, maybe provide an accent wall. So, in other words, we understand that painting anything can mean that we have to paint more than just one pass. But it is the crucial first step, because this is the foundation in which we will be putting colors on top of colors and allowing some of this layer to show through to the final layer. So here you can see it's a rather boring scene if I was simply trying to put down the colors that I see in this landscape. I tend to use photo reference work mainly for the composition. So I was intrigued by basically the S pattern, or you might even call this an L composition, drawing you from that lower left, all the way through the middle of the painting, basically like a big L. But actually, there's I would call this more of an S composition, because the creek is bending around back in the far distance, towards the right side of the photo. It's not quite clear from this distance, but that's what's going on. Here is a dirtied up version of ultramarine blue with just a little touch of cadmium light. Again, I'm not trying to necessarily replicate the color that I see in the distant hills, at least not on this particular photo. And so hence the color doesn't look the same. But this will become obvious why I did it this way later on in the painting, when I come back in and I basically changed that whole color to a distant purple. But I'm leaving bits of this prior greenish gray color alone, and to provide a contrast in the tonal values in terms of their color. Now I'm going in with the sky color. This is ultramarine blue and some titanium white. And I'm trying to avoid some of these branches that I painted earlier in the sketch, but there will be ones that I cover up slightly or ignore totally. And I'm still concentrating on painting loose by getting these colors down as quickly as possible. I didn't take a lot of time mixing on the palette, as you may have already picked up on. But by leaving some of these brown branches in, that would be very helpful for me in the next layers of paint that go on this particular painting, which I would describe this particular style as more expressionistic than even impressionism. It's my reaction to the scene more so than what we actually are seeing in the photo references. I think it's close, but it's not exact, obviously. Once again, if you've been watching this video, now that we're about a half hour in, if you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel, that would be wonderful. I'm getting closer and closer to monetizing this channel, and any of you that may be fellow YouTube creators know that that's one of the early goals. You have to have 4,000 watch hours and 1,000 subscribers. At this point in time, I'm painting on January the 3rd, 2023. I've got about 560 subscribers, and I have 3,800 plus viewed hours. So I'm very close to accomplishing the first major goal for the number of hours watched, but still need a lot of help to get the subscriber numbers up. And what will that do for me? That enables me to receive some compensation for the ads that are placed in the video. Producing some income, maybe. More than that, though, I simply do this for the joy of painting and as a way to motivate myself, especially on days in which I don't feel like painting, to get something done in the studio to release to you and to keep me painting. The only way you can improve in your painting is to paint. I'm glad you're watching the video, and I certainly hope that you learned something from my video and other people's videos that you watch. But I do want to encourage you to paint as much as you can for yourself. Now, at this stage of the painting, you can see some definite influences that the photo references had on the colors I put in the landscape and the drawing itself, I hope. Now I'm really going to turn loose and see if I can work with the colors to produce a sense of what the feelings were that day, what was going on in the scene, etc. Oh, yes, and if you watch a lot of my videos, you will notice that I tend to wear very loose-fitting clothes and not make the best visual appearance. Primarily to keep paint off of my good clothes. How's that? Just showing you that I've got a trash bag that's hooked onto the tripod, and then I've placed my paper towels right on the handle of the tripod. So this really is the easiest setup I've ever found in terms of being able to set it up and start painting plein air within just a few minutes. The panel holder just uses the clip from the tripod and attaches. It's not the most stable in the world. This is a homemade easel, obviously. And I may have made the panel holder a little bit too long, but I'm a tall painter. I'm about 6'1", and so to get the panels up closer to my eye level, I really do need extra length. Now, for the purposes of these videos, I tend to put them down as much as possible, so that way it's just easier to video record and allow you to see as much of the painting process and picture as possible. Now here, I'm beginning to lay in some thicker paint now that we've covered the canvas. So this is obviously a lighter blue, and where I was seeing that in the photo reference on the tops of these trees in this very distant hill country, I wanted to to emphasize, rather. Pardon, sometimes you may notice that I seem a little tired. I have a full-time job, as many painters do, and then I paint in the evenings. And then I'm videotaping as I'm painting in the evenings. And then in the wee hours of the evening, I go back on the same day and do the voiceover. So that way I have the experience of painting fresh in my memory and I can tell you all about it. And I actually do consider the videos almost as important as the finished painting, because to me, this is sort of like performance art, in which I get this wonderful opportunity to paint a painting and then interact with you all who are perhaps also involved in the painting process or simply love painting and engaging with you. Here I'm also intentionally working on covering all of the white that I'm finding on this canvas. And even if it looks like I may be very intentional about each of these brush strokes, I'm not. I'm really trying to paint very loose and cover up the spaces as quickly as possible while providing some variety in the brush strokes. You'll notice I covered up most of the initial lay-in of the trees, but there's just enough of that brown mixture that's still poking through what I've put down since that time. And it creates a similar kind of effect as happens when you squint and look at that photo reference. Obviously, I determined that the distant hills there were probably too green, and I will be covering that up. And the other thing is that I didn't believe that the color chosen for that did anything for the artistic value of this painting. So I'm going to be looking at the tonal value and shifting the chroma, which is the color, to a light purple, using a mixture of ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson to do that switch. Always important, as you see me working on my feet today and not sitting down, is to step back away from the painting and to take a look at it. How is it reading? And the only way you can really read a painting is get some distance away from it. It's why oil brushes are usually long-handled brushes, because historically speaking, that's how painters painted. They would use these brushes in order to get some interesting strokes and to do so without a whole lot of fidgeting. They would use these long handle brushes and then painting the strokes loosely from the edge of the brush. You see, as I hold the edge of the brush, or the end of the brush rather, and allow my gestures to take on their own significance and randomness. And I'm quite pleased at this point with that color. This is that ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson mixture to set these hills back further while still retaining some other aspects that are shared with the photo reference that attracted me to the scene to begin with. Some have wondered, do I sell these? I do sell these paintings. The one I'm making right here will eventually be sold on eBay. This is the preferred way I like to sell my paintings at this point. I do have a website at davidwpoe.org if you want to check that out. And from there, you can go to my link on eBay for artwork that I place there. Sometimes I put them on auction or on sale. Sometimes those versions are studies, and so they're a little cheaper than the other, what I would consider main works. Just showing you the mixtures again here. So I continue to squint, I look at that reference photo, and then I'm allowing myself to loosely make paint mixtures with my limited palette that would make somewhat sense to the viewer. At the same time, not being very beholden to the colors that I actually see in the reference photo. I'm not trying to, in any way, paint the exact colors I'm seeing in the photo. I want this to be a painting foremost. And for me, that often means the expressionistic aspect. Here I mixed up another mixture. Basically, this is a yellow ochre type color using burnt umber, titanium white, and some cad yellow light. And see how that directs your eye accordingly. And once again, reminding you that you don't have to buy yellow ochre. The colors that are in my limited palette, the ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, titanium white, burnt umber, cad yellow light, you can figure out relatively quickly how to mix a yellow ochre by using cad yellow light and a little bit of the ultramarine blue. Here I've just lightened that yellow ochre mixture by adding some titanium white, helping those colors to pop, especially back in the foreground. I mean, up here in the foreground. And then you also see a little bit lighter shade behind the trees in the background. to give it some depth. Now I'm emulating some of the colors I'm seeing in the foreground. Adding a little bit more of the titanium white is all I'm doing. And hopefully it's now becoming more painterly. As you can see these brush strokes being laid down, and I'm not trying to touch them back up or use the fan brush to shade. I'm using my flats to get as much paint down as possible. And here at this point, it's important to note that the amount of paint on the brush has increased dramatically. Instead of more of a wash with the mineral spirits, I'm really loading up intentionally the paint. And you should do that as well. When you're painting, make sure that you have enough paint on your brush when you're applying strokes. And this is also the level at which I begin to use a little bit more of the medium as well. Remembering the fat over lean rule, right? Here I just stepped aside so I could back up and take a look at the painting. Especially in this expressionistic style, I'm really trying to help the reader feel something, and that's hard to do if you're up close looking at all the details, because there are no details and you're up close. So walking backwards and taking a look and taking some breaks can help you to realize what colors need to be included. Is the painting reading right? Is the composition drawing the viewer's attention to the right spots in the painting? Here, I've mixed up a kind of aqua green that I'm going to use for the creek bed at first. Now I've added a little bit more of the ultramarine blue. And the way I am reading this or seeing this is that I'm trying to accentuate some of the colors that I do see present in the landscape itself, but I'm not bound to it. Another way to try to describe it is I'm trying to take your breath away rather than for you to simply look at it and say, oh, that looks just like the photo. To me, the goal is to be expressive and to get the brush moving and get some energy here. And so I'm seeing that creek and this color in it, and making sure that there's little dabs of it, so that way it helps lead the eye all the way into the painting by seeing the repetition of that color. Notice here too that we're concentrating on the big shapes. Now I'm going back in to reestablish the darks with a mixture of ultramarine blue and the alizarin crimson. See how those trees are now popping out? I was pleased with that aspect of this painting. thing to keep in mind with any landscape painting is that you need the illusion of detail of many trees. And so for the next many minutes, you'll be watching me paint in some of these loose structures for the trees. And besides branches that are going straight up and down, we also need several that are horizontal. And so once I put more in the vertical, I'll be moving to the horizontal. adding some touches of ultramarine blue, just a darker shade. As we're coming to the conclusion of this painting today, may I remind you, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the channel so you can get additional content from me. Be sure to like the video. And you can certainly check me out on my website, davidwpoe.org, where you'll also have a link to access my paintings and purchase them from eBay if you wish. Just taking and noticing the shadows and then pulling some of that violet across to indicate where those shadows are falling. adding just a few of the rocks that I see. It's also a device to lead the viewer back into the painting, softening a few of those there. And now I'm going to sign the painting. Thanks once again for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.